partly it's economics, right? I mean, you know, for example, in India, there's a massive policy initiative which is connecting 600,000 villages through cybercafes. They call them community information centers. So they're supposed to be knowledge portals for villagers to go to, so they can, you know, access information, and thereby the idea is that they have more mobility socially and economically. So they're trying to, now that is one of the most ambitious scaled, we're talking billions of dollars being invested in that. And because it would be absolutely unfeasible to provide every individual with a laptop right now, right? Like the whole one laptop per child. But if you look at the practicals of it, it's a particular, say, village that is being gifted in China, for example, with laptops, right? Who's making that selection? Why one or the other, right? So there's a sort of tension, and thereby cyber cafes are looked upon as a compromising. Listen, we can't. It is not sustainable. It's not feasible. But what we can do is create techno spaces, because why should one have ownership of a computer to learn necessarily? And also reverses. It's not necessarily a compromise. It could be actually better than an individualistic you know, interaction with the tool, because in social learning more interesting things happen. So when a group of people are interacting with a computer, theoretically, of course, they could be in you know, learning with each other as well as the tool. So the tool becomes one aspect of their larger learning process. So I did a lot of work in cyber cafes in rural India, seeing, because that's where a lot of interesting enactments are taking place outside of schools where there's computers, because that's much more regimented, right? We know, so we are not really getting a sense of what the youth actually are capable of. So I find cyber cafes to be much more freer in that sense. So I was in the Himalayas, right? Like in the north in India, and one of the incidents was I was working at the cyber cafe, and I noticed this. You know, I mean, we're talking about a culture where this whole idea of dating between teenagers is completely unknown, or at least not. You can't just go out on a date, a boy and a girl walking in the street, or go to a cafe, and then the whole village will talk. I mean, it's just not a done thing. However, cyber cafes, when I was sitting there and you know, working, the girl and the boy came in, and they were on so there's two computers, one next to the other, and they sat on each station. Then they were chatting with each other. So it was their first date, and their friends were right outside, like sort of giving them that space, but close enough. So it was this whole social experience of a date that I found very interesting, because they had that physical proximity, and yet they were very open, and they had the privacy by doing this sort of chatting back and forth with each other. So it was a sort of flirtatiousness which was going on, which was capitalizing on both online space and offline space. And I thought that, how often do you see that? So it's an ingenious way, you know, and this is what's fascinating, to go and see how new technologies are being used in different contexts that are not studied before, because it makes you question what your system is, what you take for granted that you would not normally do, right? So yeah, it puts things in perspective, or at least broadens our spectrum of what is possible and why. It's constituted as the second divide and the third divide. Like the first divide was all about access. Do people have access to these tools? They don't. Then it became about, well, there are other barriers besides just technology, like that economics. It's about literacy. Like even if you have access to a computer, do people have the literacy skills to use it? Then it became digital literacy skills. You may be able to read and write, but do you even know how to facilitate these online spaces? And then it became about social access. Just because you can, and maybe your community, like a woman, you're not allowed to use it, for example. So there are all these layers, and now it's more about, okay, given all these considerations, there's still an underlying divide in terms of broadband. For example, there's a battle for, you know, that kind of space which allows for speed, which allows for further interactions, right? Or it allows for yeah, I mean, the other aspect is that what are you capable of with these digital spaces? So some people are able to do some very sophisticated enactments online because of their access to very high-end technologies as well as. So I think it's a matter of, are you really capitalizing on the Web 2.0 spaces? And so the more it's being pioneered, it raises the bar of what you can do.